All right, so another one of these workouts where I get to talk all throughout. Uh, just getting things a little bit set up right now. I'm gonna be warming up for about 3 minutes, and once I get things rolling, I'm gonna be doing my interval sets. And today's intervals, there we go, there we go. Today's intervals, I'm gonna continue on with the 2 minutes on, 1 minute off. Last few that I've done, this particular workout has been 8 sets in total. Today I'm going to go for 10 sets. Why? Huh, kind of feel like it. See what I can do. I'm pretty sure it shouldn't be too bad. If I am pacing myself right, then adding an extra two, yeah, I'm going to be working for it, but still going to be doable. Uh, that's the thing with training and interval style training. Interval style training doesn't always have to be so intense that, uh, in the words of a run coach that I follow, it shouldn't be so intense that you're seeing God. So every once in a while, maybe you want to do some workouts that are see God type workouts. But interval training itself, yes, you want higher intensity, but doesn't necessarily mean going all out. It's when you're doing high intensity training, high intensity interval training, you're still trying to learn how to manage your energy levels all throughout the set. And I do actually have some more things to say about interval training. Conversation I had yesterday with a new redliner who started her POPAT training here, and she had a question about essentially what to do outside of training or outside of redline when training on her own. And it's a bit of a loaded question, loaded in the sense that I really don't know. And I say that because there are so many factors at play. One is, how often are they going to be training here? If someone's going to get the bulk of their training, particularly high intensity training, in, then the training that they do on their own may not have to be a whole lot. Uh, but I also got to factor in what is their training history. If they're already used to training a lot, then they could still continue training on their own. Oh, all right, 2 minute set. I started. Goal here, just like the last few, keep it around the high 23s, low 24s for the first half, and on the back half, push it towards 25s. And then on the 1 minute recovery in between, try to keep the speed above 20, at the very least not below 20. But going back to that, in terms of like what to do for anyone who's training at Redline anyway, what to do outside of here, it really depends on how often you're going to be training at Redline, the kind of classes that you're going to be training at Redline, and realistically, how much can you commit to training outside of Redline as well. There's a lot of balancing factors that we gotta there's a lot of factors that we gotta keep in consideration. And so anytime someone asks me like what should I be doing on my own, I can't give a clear-cut answer because it really does depend. Depends on the training history, depends on when you're testing, depends on how often you're training here, experience level with certain exercises or modalities and whatnot. So the one thing that we did touch upon was in terms of interval training. So when she asked me what should I be doing, outside of Redline, my first question to her was, what are you already doing on your own? And so particularly cardio training. And so one of her All right, 1 minute easy here. One of our cardio training workouts is to do intervals of 30 seconds of work followed by 30 seconds of rest. But in her words, the way that she was basically doing it was doing it more for general fitness. And that's what I find a lot of people do. How they approach interval training is they're doing it for general fitness. And it usually means whatever the length of interval is, 30 seconds, 1 minute, what have you. It's go hard for that, take it easy, go hard again. Now, in general, there is nothing wrong with that. But now when we're trying to basically sharpen our fitness for something like the POPAT test or COPAT test, PAIR test, RCMPs, PFA, we can't just go by on general fitness anymore. We need to start to get more specific. Now, when I say specific, I don't necessarily mean that you're emulating your test completely, but specific in the sense that we'd have to measure what we're doing. So I've talked a few times now. You've seen a few of these other videos that I have posted. I talk about the speed that I'm trying to maintain here during these 2 minute intervals. That's what I'm measuring. That's how I'm gauging my effort level during these intervals. So in her situation, in terms of 30 seconds, now she says she uses the bike. So I told her, use speed as that one measurement to determine what kind of progress are you making, right? So just as a simple example, let's say she was doing 10 sets and her goal was to maintain speed 25 throughout it all, then that's the goal. To maintain the speed of 25, whether that's miles per hour, kilometers per hour, it doesn't really matter. I'm just throwing a number out there as an example. But having something specific and measure what you're doing so you can see what kind of progress you're making, not only from workout to workout, but maybe even within the workout. Now granted, you're not always going to make continual improvements. There's going to be workouts every now and then where it's going to suck. But as long as you see a general trend of improvement, you can only see that if you're measuring something. If you're just basing your workouts purely on how you feel, and don't get me wrong, it's good to know how you feel. That's how you teach yourself to be more in tune with your body. But we still need to have some sort of measurement at some point, right? Particularly if you have a certain time goal you want to reach for your test, or whatever it is that you end up doing. We need something a bit more concrete to follow along on, or to measure, I should say. So like I said, right now I'm using, this is set number 3, I believe now. Yeah, I'm on the 3rd set now. Set number 3 out of 10. So I'm using high 23s, low 24s as my benchmark to maintain for the first 4 to 5 sets. That's my measurement. Now, I could use heart rate as well as another measurement, but heart rate can also vary. And for interval style training, I like to know where my heart rate's at, but I don't base my effort level purely on what is my heart rate. But with speed, I can always measure speed, right? And then if I have to match how I feel with the speed, then I can do that. Where I usually find I pay more attention to my heart rate is when I'm doing more of my easy efforts, my steady state training, or zone 2, if you will. I mean, that's a term that's being used nowadays, but zone 2, steady state, aerobic training, essentially they're the same thing. And with zone 2 training, I want to be able to make sure that my heart rate is usually no higher than the mid 150s or so. So if I don't have my heart rate monitor while I'm doing a easy run, maybe easy here on the Airdyne, and I always use the talk test as a way to gauge my effort level. Now, a talk test, can't remember if I mentioned this one before, but the talk test is, can you maintain a conversation throughout the entire workout? But not in the manner that I'm doing right now. Like, you can see every time I'm talking and I gotta recover, every so often I have to pause, take a breath in. If I'm actually going at an easy pace, I'd just be having an easy conversation. I wouldn't have to stop every sentence or two to catch my breath. So that'd be the talk test. If you don't have a heart rate monitor to kind of gauge your progress that way, you can always use the talk test to manage your effort level for things like zone 2 training. Whereas something like this with intervals, whether I do it on here, whether I do it on the track, anytime I'm pushing the pace, I like to have my heart rate, or even just check my heart rate every so often just to see where I'm at. But I don't base my training around heart rate when it comes to intervals. I base my training around the speed. So in this case, the actual miles per hour, I believe this one measures miles per hour. But if I'm on the track, or I'm doing distance-based intervals, then I'm timing myself for those intervals. So like a 400-meter run, the last 400-meter interval workout I did, my goal is to be around the mid 120s for each 400 sets. So that's my target. That's my speed. So you might be wondering, why would I pay attention more to my heart rate during zone 2 training? Because when we're working zone 2, well, technically speaking, even as I'm working these intervals, I'm working the aerobic system. And just to simplify things, you got an aerobic system and an anaerobic system. Basically, one system means with oxygen, one means without oxygen. And it's your body's way of being able to generate generate energy depending on the demands you're placing on it. So aerobic means with oxygen, anaerobic means without oxygen. When we're training really hard, we tap into our anaerobic system. And that means our body can produce energy much quicker, but it also means we deplete our energy systems much quicker. So anaerobic can be useful, but in the long term, it's to rely on it, it's not useful in that regard. And so this is where the aerobic system comes in. We can develop our aerobic system to much greater capacity than we can our anaerobic system. There's much more range to work with. So just to give you an idea between aerobic and anaerobic, on the one extreme is sprinting. Think 100-meter sprint. Something that's going to last about 10 seconds, maybe 15 seconds of an all-out effort. That is anaerobic. But even when you're getting up to like a 400-meter very, very, very fast run, that's still very much anaerobic. But you only last in that system for a minute, maybe a minute and a half tops, before you have to start relying on your aerobic system more to get you through whatever task you're doing. So anaerobic is very much higher intensity bursts of effort. And aerobic can actually be quite a long range. So I mentioned anaerobic would be the extreme on one end. That would be the sprinting. The extreme on the other end would be something like a marathon run, or let's just say a few hours of hiking in the mountains. That's working. That'd be on the other extreme, and that's more the aerobic system. But then within the aerobic system, there's a lot of range we can work with. And so when we're working our zone 2, we're working more towards the lower end of the aerobic system. Just give me a sec here. So zone 2 training is more on the lower end. Now it's not the lowest end. I mean, technically, the lowest end would be sleeping. But in terms of exercise, it's on the low end. And the reason we want to develop our low end aerobic, part of it is the greater our aerobic capabilities, their aerobic engine, if you will, the better we can recover from high intensity efforts. So just think if you're a weightlifter, whether it's Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, or strength training in general, bodybuilding, whatever. If you have a very good, or even just good, aerobic system, you're able to recover a lot quicker in between the sets that you perform, even heavy sets. Your body's able to recover quicker. So developing our aerobic system is very important to have as well for the recovery aspect. So that's where zone 2 training is going to come into play. Things that I'm doing like right now, all right, I'm on the back half now. I'm going to see if I can hold minimum 24, maybe even 24 and a half of speed here. But what I'm doing right now, even though this is interval training and it's higher intensity, I'm still essentially working the aerobic system, just on the higher end of it. And if I can develop both at the same time, that higher end and the lower end, now my capabilities when it comes to conditioning is going to be that much more. It's going to allow me to put in more work. It's going to allow me to work at a higher effort level for longer. It helps me avoid having to tap into the anaerobic system for as much as possible. So at a certain point, there's a threshold between the aerobic system and the anaerobic system. Sometimes you hear it as lactate threshold. Now it's not necessarily a specific line. You gotta look at it as a gradient, but there is a point where there's a increased need to get your energy from the anaerobic system. Because the demands you're placing on the body, whatever oxygen you're taking in is not enough to help fuel the energy needed. So that's why we dip into anaerobic. But we want to avoid the anaerobic system for as long as possible. Because as I mentioned earlier, you're not going to last very long in that particular system. So if I were to put this in the context of the POPAT test, I would say definitely running the obstacle course for someone like myself, as fast as I'm running it, I'm still within the range of my aerobic system. I'm just on the higher end of it. Although this isn't to say you guys aren't doing it either, but just think of the obstacle course as you're working the higher end of your aerobic system. Now, once you get to the machine and the vault, you're starting to tap into the anaerobic system a bit more. And so this is why I say you don't want to sprint the obstacle course or run it any faster than you should. Because once you tap into that anaerobic system, it's hard to recover from. And since strength exercises are essentially anaerobic, you lose that power by the time you get to the machine. And even by the time you start the vault, but particularly with the machine. That's why you want to stay as aerobic as possible on the high end of it, but you still want to stay as aerobic as possible. Then when you get onto the machine, you push it a little bit more, start tapping into that anaerobic system. And then at the vault, you just let it all go. Hit into that high end. Hit into that red zone, that red line, if you will, on the vault. And then hopefully you still have enough to recover for that bag carry at the very end. But if you got high enough aerobic abilities, then that 30 seconds that you have in between the vault and the bag carry, you'll have recovered enough of it to be able to do the bag carry at the end. Right, you got the sufficient strength. Yeah, this is getting challenging now. There's only 7 set. I got 3 more after this. Actually, I'm working hard to try to keep this between 24 and a half. Now, doesn't help. I was sitting in a dentist chair earlier this morning. My breakfast was many hours ago. I mean, already beyond lunchtime. One thing I had before this workout was a banana. That was about half an hour before I started this workout. And prior to that, breakfast was around 6. I started this around 1:30. So, energy-wise, it's starting to hit me. But, I mean, I got 3 more sets here. I'm going to do what I can. So there's another thing that's going to factor performance. Obviously, nutrition. Are you eating enough calories to sustain the kind of energy you're putting into your training? Are you getting the right amount of protein and carbs? Protein for the recovery between workouts, particularly strength workouts or hard running efforts, and carbs for the fueling. Are you getting enough of those? Same with hydration. Are you keeping yourself hydrated enough? That's going to factor into your performance. What's your sleep like? Are you sleeping well? Whether it's 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours. Is it quality sleep? Because that will factor into your performance. How much stress is in your life? That's going to factor performance. So if you ever see a dip in your performance, and then when I'm talking about performance, I'm not just talking about being able to do the full test. I'm just talking about day-to-day performance in your workouts. When you see a dip in performance, A one workout dip is nothing to be concerned about. Just think again, what was my nutrition for the day? What was my sleep last night? Am I going through anything stressful right now? Okay. That's all going to factor in. It's factoring into my performance right now. But if you have one workout that's off, that's not a concern. I would say when you have several in a row, you gotta start looking at what's affecting it. Are you recovering well? Do you need to back off training a little bit in terms of intensity? You don't have to go hard all the time. In fact, your improvements from your workouts isn't in the workout itself. It's the recovery between workouts. That's where you're getting your improvements. Because your body has to recover and compensate, or what would be called super compensation, for the demands that you placed on it. In order for it to come back stronger, it needs to recover to a level higher than what it was before. So recovery doesn't just mean a rest day. It's all the things I just talked about: nutrition, sleep, lifestyle, stress, whatnot. All that's going to factor in to how well you can improve your performance. So if you've been pushing it and pushing it and pushing it and pushing it for weeks on end, or maybe even months on end, and you're just at that plateau, or you're seeing very marginal gains, I mean, on one hand, you might have to tweak the training a little bit if you've been doing the same thing over and over again. But on the other hand, it could just simply mean you need to take a break, do something else entirely different. Not only as a physical reset, but a mental reset too. And that's the other thing that many people don't pay attention to, is how much the mind is going to affect your performance. Mind can do a lot of things. It can help us get over the hump, but can easily take us down. So your mindset, your mental fortitude, that's going to be developed during training sessions, especially hard training sessions. Because you can't just think that during the test itself, you're just going to turn things on like a light switch. You know, if something goes wrong, that you'll just shrug it off and go. That type of resilience, if you will, comes with what you do in training. If mistakes are made in training, or if sessions just isn't going the way you want it to, you gotta learn that in the workouts itself, not only when you're doing a performance test, like POPAT, like PFA, pair, beep test, whatever the case may be. Mental training is already happening at the same time you're doing hard workouts. All right, so 9 sets done. Last set coming up. I've been able to maintain around 24 to 24 and a half for a good chunk of these sets. Let's see how I can push it on this last one. See if I can get closer to 25, and maybe on the last 30 seconds, About 20 to 30 seconds. See if I can maybe push it close to 26. But right now, mid 24s to 25. That's the goal. So apologies if I go quiet over the next minute or so here. So I've been very much aerobic up until this point. High-end aerobic, but aerobic nonetheless. I mentioned lactate threshold earlier. This is one way to raise my threshold so that I don't have to dip into the aerobic too soon. I can go at faster paces for longer. Alright, been able to stay above 25 up until this point. I got 50 seconds left. I don't want to dip below 25. Alright, last 30 seconds. Alright, the 26. Min 26 for the last 30 here. Ah, oh, that was hard. Okay, so I just took my heart rate there. At least 180. Now, I don't think I was at 180. Now, I'm pretty sure I wasn't at 180 through the majority of the sets. But it would have been creeping up to that point. After the first couple sets, maybe 2 or 3 sets, I would say it's more likely my heart rate would be between the 160 170 range. On those middle sets, 170 to 180. Probably even set number 9. I'd probably say at least 175. But yeah, that was about at least 180, probably about 185 or so. Now, when I run the POPAT, at least when I'm peak fitness, I can get my heart rate at least 200. Well, high 190s, mid to high 190s, but I can get my heart rate into the 200s for peak. That's me personally. Everyone's peak heart rate is going to be a bit different. Like my wife, for example, I know for her, she can have a really low resting heart rate, but her max heart rate might be in the like high 180s or so. But for me, I can push it. Like when I'm in what I would consider peak fitness for myself, I can get my heart rate up there and sustain it. And with a lot of endurance athletes, that's what they're capable of doing. Be able to sustain a high heart rate for longer periods of time. But they have such a high threshold, lactate threshold, that they can work at faster speeds but still stay aerobic for whatever it is that they're doing, whether it's a 5K run, 10K run, marathon, even something like a mile and a half run. I'm gonna go about another minute here of cool down. If you made it this far to the end, thank you for sticking with me up until this point. Hopefully you got a lot out of it. The main reason I'm doing this is mainly just to get thoughts out of my head and just to get me through stationary training, because as much as I like endurance training, I don't necessarily like being stationary. So part of this is a distraction. In a way, part of it's mental training too for myself. Can I still keep my wits about me when I'm pushing my effort levels? Oh, okay. Well, that's that. So again, thank you for sticking with me. If you have all the way through to the end, if you got any questions about this, please feel free to leave a comment below, or you can always email me directly at mark@rlconditioning.ca. That is MARC@rlconditioning.ca. But until next time, have a good one.